Welcome to Railfans Canada. I'm Shane Seguin. Join us as we discover Ottawa's O train, Montreal's REM, and metro systems together.
Time.
There's always something. Welcome to Railfans Canada. I'm Shane Seguin. Joining me today is David Bellerive, and our guest today is Patrick McKay, who is the creator of obike.ca, which is an interactive map that Patrick created that shows the current biking infrastructure as well as future and planned biking infrastructure in the city of Ottawa. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining me today.
Nice to be here.
And a pleasure as always.
So Patrick, I'd like to start with you. If you could tell us a little bit about the project that you've created, obike.ca, that would be great to sort of kick things off with talking about your map.
For sure. Well, about a year and a half ago, I just really wanted to know what the future plans of biking in the city were. And there is the overall cycling plan for Ottawa, but it doesn't really show you what is in progress and what is actually going to be built. It's just a rough idea, and it's not always followed very well. So I decided to start tracking each individual project, and then over time it just got more and more and more, and I needed an easier way to really represent it. So I started using Mapbox to show off all the different projects in progress. And over here we got a legend showing the different options. So anything green is what we currently have for cycle tracks. Anything purple is what is currently under construction. So we got a lot of projects on the go. And then anything yellow and orange is what is planned in the next few years or so. And then red is just in the community design plans and what is eventually going to be built, but it could still be a long time.
So our main topic today is obviously we're going to be talking about cycling and transit infrastructure, and there's a lot of merging in between the two modes of transportation. So a lot of people will use transit, let's say the O train or the metro or bus or streetcars, to get from point A to point B, from home to work, to shopping, to do groceries, to go meet up with friends. But there's also an opportunity for people to use cycling or bikes to get around. And the beauty of it is that rather than take a bus to your rapid transit service, you can use a bike directly from your home at the time of your choosing to leave. You're not stuck necessarily to a schedule. You can leave, go do your shopping if it's within biking distance, or for farther distances, you can bike to the nearest station, get on rapid transit bus service, rack and roll your bike on the front, or get on the train or the subway or the metro or the LRT, continue your trip, and then continue from there on bike. So obviously it's something that a lot of people do, but there are challenges involved in that, and that involves whether there is proper connection to be able to actually bike safely to the transit station that you need to access. And Patrick, obviously you've created a great map that shows, in the case of Ottawa, how things connect and how things work. We're looking now at Ottawa as well with stage 1 of the O train. Stage 2 is going to be extending further east and west to the south. There's going to be plenty of new connectivity, multi-use pathways. So for people either walking, active life cycle, biking, things like that, of that nature. So let's start by talking about the types of connections that are available to transit stations, from whether it's a bike path or segregated lanes or just like a painted line on the side of the road. What kind of things are there out there to commute around?
Well, for stage 1, a lot of the resources that were built to accommodate cycling for the stations as they are now, they were only built as multi-use path. Like single segregated cycling wasn't really thought of that much in the city in 2013 when the plan was being devised. So it was just regular paths that were built to each station, and they don't always have the best connections to the rest of the network. The east end of downtown with the path that follows along U Ottawa, that is a pretty good example, and it goes all the way through Herdman and over to Tremblay, but it does just end there. You can go over the bridge, but it doesn't really get you much further. There's also the well-known example of the Pimsey Bridge, where they built a 4-lane bridge. I think it was 6-lane actually when it was built, and they had no cycling accommodation for this brand new train station, and they had to build it in afterwards.
And PMZ is an even better example if we think about the fact that there was a plaza built with an underpass and everything, so with bike racks and space for that, but basically just connected to the development that's right next to it and nowhere other than that on the west, and then on the east. And on the west side, well, the bike path has opened just a few months back. Actually, it's the NCC took quite a while, to put it mildly, to get it ready. So
yeah, it was almost, I think, over 2 years where it was just sitting unconnected to anything. They had this beautiful plaza, which is nice, and I do love. It's one of my favorite places in the city, but it's not well suited to cycling because it's got these hard turns with jagged curbs that make it really difficult. And for a long time, cyclists would just go down the steps, not seeing them, and that potentially causes some injuries.
So we pointed out a couple of things here. So obviously, segregated is obviously the safest way because it's separated from the traffic, whether it's a concrete barrier or those little flexible pylons, which aren't necessarily the best solution, but it's cheap to implement, and it at least gives some indication to road users, drivers, to keep their distance from it rather than encroaching onto it. But a really good example of superb cycling infrastructure definitely has to be Montreal. And what you see in Montreal, even the downtown, there's a significant amount of segregated cycling infrastructure. So concrete, it's set back from the road slightly. There's a concrete curb or barrier to stop the cars from coming right into it. Crisscrosses downtown. You can go up and down Bellerive. You can go down, I think it's Maisonneuve. There's plenty of spots you can go. And I've done it many times where I've gone from the Olympic Stadium in the east all the way through downtown to Atwater or Lionel Groulx. And it's really fantastic how you can just pass through so easily without having to be fearful of cars. Obviously, you go through some traffic lights, but I mean, beyond that, it's pretty smooth going. Add to that, you also have a fantastic bike share program, Bixi. And those are positioned on so many streets, and there's a big presence outside of every metro station as well. So it's very accessible to be able to make the first leg and or last leg of your journey by bike, whether you have your own or you're making use of the bike share. But in Ottawa, we don't quite see exactly the same thing. We do have a lot of beautiful cycling infrastructure. So, you think of the Ottawa River pathways, you think of along the canal, but other areas, it's really hit or miss, especially downtown where you're pretty much just on the other side of a painted line. And oftentimes you'll have delivery vehicles, cars, someone going in for donuts at the Tim Hortons, just parked right in the bike lane, which is pretty disrespectful, or in the bike lane and onto the sidewalk, which is just
that's dirt.
I'm just going to save myself from using some colorful language there, but I mean, that's just ridiculous. So, there's a lot of things that need to be improved on. So what kind of improvements are we seeing being proposed or being worked on for downtown Ottawa that are going to make things a little better?
Well, for downtown, there is some improvements coming. There's no set dates on the way, but we are getting somewhere. With the O Train Stage 1, Queen Street was redone without cycling infrastructure, but it was done to make it much less width, which was a big improvement. And I do enjoy cycling down Queen Street as opposed to something like Albert, which is pretty dangerous. Well, Slater in the right direction. But in the future, we're going to be rebuilding Albert and Slater, and we're currently in progress of rebuilding it at the west section. And then this will allow a very good connection through downtown. But closer to the train, we've also got Wellington, which will eventually get a bi-directional cycle track through it, and then maybe something different during the closed portion. So with lots of improvements coming downtown, and eventually we will be finishing up the O'Connor Phase 2 to connect it to Wellington and the different sections of cycle tracks on Slater and Albert. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that O'Connor actually is probably a really good example of bi-directional bikeway that's segregated from the road itself. And also with its proper lights, instead of just relying on the goodwill of drivers. But sorry, carry on. I didn't mean to interrupt there.
No, that's great. But yeah, O'Connor, it really shows the good and the bad, where we've got this kind of mostly great bi-directional facility all the way to downtown, and then by the time you're in downtown, you get to the end of it and it just ends, and the traffic's in the opposite direction. So you can't even continue forward. So you have to turn off there, and then there's no really easy way to turn left to keep going north. So you'd run out of space.
This is like a perfect example of like the missing gap. Obviously, it's going to be completed at some point in the future, but there's also other areas, not necessarily downtown, but across the city. And I think you've actually shared some pictures with us in the past. You don't have to pull them up now, but where you're going and the bike path just suddenly ends. Like it's as if it's not that it comes to a natural end. It's just, it was built and all of a sudden it's just grass. Like it's as if
it was built anymore.
It was not built, or they stopped building it, or like it's very unfinished and highly unsafe. So
there's a section of that on Abbott Street in Stittsville, in one of the new developments there, where they built up the cycle tracks. They partially built up the cycle tracks, I should say. And for about 2 years now, they've just left a gap on an unfinished section right next to a park. So you're cycling westbound on a cycle track, suddenly grass, intersection, and then starts again.
Now, obviously, I mean, we're bringing up a lot of interesting points here about cycling and how it's important, whether you take transit or not. But obviously, to help people get on transit, to get through downtown, to get through their own communities, obviously the infrastructure has to be there, because, of course, you can ride on the road next to cars, but it can be extremely dangerous, and you're really at the mercy of how good a driver the person is that's about to pass you or come behind you.
Earlier, you mentioned the REV bike lanes in Montreal. One thing about those that I would like to mention is how wide they are. They have such a high width that allows you to pass other cyclists who are going slower. So if you're stuck behind someone who's a little slower biking at you, you're not just kind of stuck there. You don't have to jump onto the sidewalk to get around them. And it really is very helpful in building a 8 to 80 network where a child or elderly person can bike and not feel like they're holding people up or doing something unsafe. Because
sorry. No, I was just going to say, I think it's a really important part of convincing people that they can do trips on a bike also, that it's not just, it's a hobby. I do biking on the weekends because I just feel like going for a bike ride. It's like building infrastructure that's welcoming to everyone is a big part of the problem. But carry on, sorry.
No, that's really important. But right now, the minimum cycle track width for the city of Ottawa is 1.5 meters, which is not reasonable to pass other cyclists in. So you often have to just go around them either on the sidewalk or jump onto the road for a moment, which can cause some danger.
Now, what kind of standards, in Patrick, because I know that you cycle a lot, you have an electric bike, which definitely gives you even better range and more mobility than potentially the average cyclist would have. So I'm sure you've been around quite a bit of the city by bike. What kind of infrastructure do you find is, like there's a couple ways to look at it. What kind of infrastructure do you find is best for the cyclists as far as safety and usability, and what would you say is the bare minimum that people need?
I definitely try to focus my routes on safe cycling infrastructure, like cycle tracks where it's separated from both pedestrians and the road, just to keep it as safe as possible. But even sometimes those routes have hazards that aren't really conductive to safe cycling. Like, for instance, the new Scott Street work that was just done in conjunction with the Stage 2 detour. It has a lot of crossings where drivers will approach the cycle track, not really realize it's there, and then go over the stop line and stop right within it. And sometimes they won't even check as you're coming down what should be an official lane of the road. And then you either have to go around them or stop completely to avoid being hit by them. A solution to this would be to raise the crossing on smaller side streets. So on any of these like small streets, for instance, Rockhurst Road, you could have the cycle track and the sidewalk raised to the regular height of the sidewalk, and then have the road come up to the sidewalk to meet them, to provide basically a speed bump and make it really obvious that it's there. Scott Street as a whole was overall a good project, and it's continuing to be expanded. But it does have a lot of oddities, like at Island Park, where it's not really easily used, where you have to kind of make a big, hard turn to keep going forwards. And it's always has people parked in the cycle lane.
So we have a couple points that we'll talk about. So connectivity at the stations, the good and the bad. So what would you, David and Pat there, what stations would you say are good examples of good connectivity, and which ones would you say are, let's say the worst?
All of like the east stations, east of downtown stations, they're really good because they're on the multi-use path mentioned earlier, and they have a lot of like safe canal cycling that connects them to a large portion of the downtown area. But you have other stations, for instance, like I'm blanking on the name. Saint Laurent, there we go. Thank you.
I wasn't sure if you meant Surville or Saint Laurent there.
Surville is actually pretty decent.
Yeah.
Saint Laurent, it doesn't have much of a connection anywhere currently. There is eventually going to be a planned project to road diet Saint Laurent to add cycle facilities and potentially bus facilities as well as a transit priority corridor. And we will likely see some improvement then, but that could be any time in the next 10 to 20 years. But currently, Saint Laurent has very little connected to it for cycling. But you mentioned Surville, and it does have. Surville is here. It does have a path that goes up to the Aviation Parkway and all through there. And I biked it about a month ago, and it was pretty decent.
It is, yeah.
The connections to that path aren't amazing, but it does allow you to get elsewhere. And it does have this path that kind of goes off behind some of this industrial complex and then just kind of ends. But it does, the effort was there. Yeah. Do you have any stations that you know?
Well, I was going to mention Surville, definitely the new path that opened again after the train opened. So I think that's a common theme with stage 1 infrastructure that we've seen, is that, for example, the bike path between Ottawa and Erdemann and Tremblay basically was existing already. The multi-use pathway was there before the station, so it was it was implemented before the train started, I should say. At Saint Laurent, they just reused what was there before, so it's mostly to connect people to the mall from the south side of the 417. Then you get to Blair, which has redevelopments that happened, and there was not even a provision or intended plan to have a bike path that follows or a multi-use pathway of some sort that follows along the guideway up to, let's say, Surville or Saint Laurent, which would be, I think, a really great connection. An easy one it would have been an easy one to implement, because even the new developments that they're building right next to City Park Drive, they're required to keep space for a multi-use pathway, but it's not being done. So that's I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruits that were missed eastwards of Surville. But I think for the east side, that's pretty much it for me too.
Yeah, I have biked in the Blair Mall kind of area once ever, and it was not a very fun experience. I biked
It's
down
not.
City Park,
No.
and
No.
the traffic there, even on just quiet City Park Street, it's still super fast, and it's not very safe.
To put it mildly, having lived around there for like a year and a half, it's really not bike friendly at all. It's not too bad if you're willing to go up the stairs and cross the bridge over the 417 to go south. But even then, it's all you have really access to is you're stuck in a residential neighborhood between Blair, which is it's Blair, and then in a street which is well, I hope you love being driven next to you at 80 kilometers an hour with a bike lane that's basically a paint on the ground and nothing else. So it's not really conductive, I think, to encourage people biking, to put it mildly. But
yeah, but luckily there is some improvements planned for Blair. They will have a multi-use pathway connecting into the station area, and then it'll continue on eastwards towards Montreal and all the way to the Sir George Etienne Cartier Parkway. And that'll be a massive improvement for connections. Yes. And I believe they do plan some connections into the neighborhoods along here.
I would hope so.
Hopefully.
It'll make a great place to look at trains too, by the way. Like, especially with the, I would assume it's not going to cross the median of the 174 because it'll be pretty much pointless.
Yeah, it will stay on the north side.
Yeah, so if it stays on the north side, gonna make a great spot to look at trains go over the flyover once that starts testing and everything. But yeah, I think that's gonna be like, I hope it's gonna be great access because I think if we zoom out the old map of Ottawa, the big problem is like we can go back more in the stage one specific is if you want to get from one end to the other, there's not a continuous option anywhere. It's all jointed middle small pieces that you have to find a way around to get there. But
like, for example, I used to live in Orleans, and to get from Orleans downtown, it isn't too bad. Like, you'll take, you go through Orleans Wood and take the Ottawa River pathway there through Rockcliffe and, finally come up by Sussex. But once you get there, you're pretty much riding on the sidewalk or you're riding on the road on Sussex, which is a little iffy. And then you get to the Chateau Laurier in Wellington, and that situation continues. Once you finally get to the Portage Bridge, then you can sort of duck back down and you can go behind by the locks there and go behind the Parliament. Obviously right now most of that path is closed, so let's just pretend that doesn't exist. So you would come by Portage, then you would loop back down, you go by Le Breton and Pimissy Station, then you'll go past and rejoin the Parkway, go by Parkdale and finally reach Lincoln Fields. And then you can take pathways from there down towards Algonquin and Baseline. So it's really an interesting path that you can take, but it's that downtown section between either the canal and Rockcliffe, especially around Sussex area there, where the path really just comes to an end and you're on a sidewalk. And we all know you're not supposed to ride on a sidewalk because you're going to get a ticket. So there is a bit of a bike lane with the painted line, but, again, you're at the mercy of people zooming past you, and you're in a little spot that's about not even a meter wide with sewer grates and uneven pavement. So you tend to ride the line and then you're close to cars, and it's very stressful. Honestly, the last few times I've done it, I've just stayed on the sidewalk. I'm like, you know what, I don't want to take any chances because I don't feel safe riding on that. But I think that part of the infrastructure they're planning to improve, I think, to some extent.
On Sussex, it's a bit of a loss because just 10 years ago they rebuilt Sussex and they didn't build it with any cycling in mind. So it's a pretty lost connection there.
It's going to be a while before they do something. That's pretty much what it means.
Exactly. And then speaking of riding a bike on a sidewalk, currently the detour for the pathway behind Parliament, which is closed from the parking lot here all the way to about here, the detour is just right on the sidewalk. That's the official detour, which is a bit iffy, especially such a busy touristy area on some days.
Especially right now where you have one of the lanes on Wellington is closed because of the construction on Well, the construction on the West Memorial Building too. So it definitely presents a lot of challenge. And there's people zooming past on the outside lane to then have to merge into the inside lane to then turn right onto Lion. So it's not something to be totally enthused about, let's say. So we've talked about the connectivity at the stations. We talked a little bit about cycling detours, the mostly bad. So what kind of cycling detours would we say are bad? I mean, like obviously right now, one of the examples would be that the pathway behind Parliament Hill and the Supreme Court is pretty much closed for the most part. So people have to detour onto Wellington or use other methods to get through there. It is a busy area. Granted, the section between Elgin and Bank is closed, but I mean, we're only talking a 2-block area or 2 or 3 block area. But
yeah, it's a 2 or 3 block area, but on either side, there's no connection.
No.
So it's pretty difficult to get to unless you ride on the sidewalk.
And the sidewalk area around the Chateau Laurier is very busy.
Incredibly.
Very, very busy because you have people transiting through there to go to Parliament Hill, to go look at the locks, and to go to the Rideau Center. So there's a lot of activity at that intersection. On the west side of downtown, it isn't quite as bad, but definitely if you're passing through there, you're going to have to make your way through the east one way or the other, and it can be pretty rough to the point that you'd probably just end up walking your bike because you just don't want to chance it. Or there's too many cars. They're going to hit you at some point, and there's too many people on the sidewalk. So, I mean, you're pretty much left with taking your life in your own hands or walking your bike.
Yeah. For station-specific bad detours, we actually have one at Tunney's Pasture right now. Just recently, they removed the old bridge that was just a pile of dirt and gravel that was crossing the trench. And they replaced it. Yeah, the phone block bridge. They replaced it with a regular proper bridge. But when they removed the old bridge, they didn't repave the sidewalk and the cycle track that was going through them. And currently, several months after the project completed, it's still just a big pile of loose gravel, which is incredibly difficult to cycle through. I have a bit of an advantage because I have a fat tire bike, but for a regular bicycle tire, it's not going to do well in that gravel. So we've got this pretty decent cycle infrastructure on both sides of it, and then it's missing in the middle, and there's no real way around it other than just to power through. So that's a bit of a loss there. I've been trying to speak with the city to get a timeline on when that will be done, but there's nothing really set. But for a stage 2 detour, which there's a lot of right now, we have this gap between the cycle track here and the cycle track here at Westboro Station, where it's just another pit of gravel, but the gravel is so loose and there's so many bumps that if I wasn't on a fat tire bike, I would walk through it because you're just not going to make it through. So we've got beautiful infrastructure on both sides, and then just a gap. We spend a lot of money to build it, and then we don't build it in a good enough state where it can actually be used.
So I'm going to turn to the chat briefly here. So Dwight Williams mentioned just a while ago when we were talking about Searville, he wanted to mention that there used to be a pedestrian underpass connecting the 2 parts of Michael Street near Searville. So I'm not quite sure. Michael Street.
This is Michael Street here.
Okay.
Pedestrian underpass connecting the 2 parts. Oh, I guess he means under the 417, or.
Oh, okay.
That's what I would assume.
That makes sense. Yes. Well, that would be a great connection.
But it used to be there. They said. But it probably went away when they. I assume when they started building the guideway for the LRT, or if it was part of, or if it got killed in the highway widening project. I'm just trying to check on Street View, see if there's something obvious that I'm like, oh yeah, right. But
yeah, that would be a way calmer connection than any of the other ways onto the other side of the 417.
At least if I'm understanding it right, what he says, but. Yeah, I'm looking Street View, and it's not obvious exactly where it was or how it was set up, but mystery.
And then we have a message from Alain Boyer. Hello, Alain, from Montreal. Big Réseau Express Metropolitain fan, so welcome.
Yeah.
He said he had a ticket once riding his bike, so I'm assuming he rode it on the sidewalk. He got a ticket. But I think at this point everybody's kind of done the sidewalk thing.
Oh yeah.
There's
Like-
always somewhere where it's not safe to be in the road, and it's not
No.
safe to be anywhere else. So
It's not safe, and on top of that, I can already read in my mind the headlines of what happens. Is if you're on the street and a car hits you, then it's your fault for being in their way. But if you're on a sidewalk trying to protect yourself, then because it's in many places, it's much safer to be on the sidewalk than to be in what they call a bike lane, aka a paint job on a road that's going 60, where people park into it when they feel like it. I would say it's in some places probably more dangerous to be in the bike lane than to be on the sidewalk and just hope you don't see a cop or someone that gives you a ticket for it.
Yep. And there's people who are very aggressive about you being out of their way, because even just yesterday, I already told you guys, but just yesterday I was honked at and then got very aggressively yelled at by a person for being biking in the road on a calm local street. It wasn't any major street at all. It was just, there was houses on the street. It wasn't busy. And then this person came up behind me, honked, and then started basically a yelling match. But people are very aggressive, and they literally said to me, buy a car. It's like, I'm on just this quiet street. There's no problems here. But back to the detours.
God.
We've got this kind of a detour path along the Bailey Bridge for the Transitway detour. When it approaches this area, I'm sure there's pretty heavy restrictions on how much space they had, but it's pretty dangerous along here for cyclists and pedestrians to be mixed because of how tight the corridor is, and it's on kind of a blind. There's a bit of a blind spot, so that's not the best one, but it's pretty decent. And then right now, all of this is actually closed. There's no real way to get onto the River Parkway anymore because there's a bunch of construction happening. Another detour would be over by Lincoln Fields. We have the pedestrian bridge that is being replaced right now.
Oh God.
That bridge was supposed to be
Was
supposed to be replaced and open within about a week of the closure, and it's now been about 4 or 5 months. And there's no sign they're even working on it. I believe the reason is Hydro Ottawa has to move some utilities, and they don't seem to be in much of a hurry to do so.
So important to note that the gray yellow area at the side there, that's the what is it, Woodruff High School?
Yes.
Yes.
Really? Okay. So I mean, obviously there's a lot of foot traffic and young people. I'm not going to say young adults because then it makes it sound like they should walk around farther. But I mean, there's a lot of people that don't necessarily or should have to loop all the way back up north to Carling Avenue to loop around. I mean, like, it's ridiculous. There was an old pedestrian bridge that crossed. They built a new one nearby because the alignment of the train necessitated that needed to be removed. So they built a new one, and it's from what we can see, it looks really nice.
When it's going to be built,
but when it's going to be opening, the issue is really the two approaches. There's utilities, as was mentioned a while ago, that they need to sort out. But the detour continues, and we're going to be heading into the winter, and Carling Avenue isn't in the best of shape either because of the construction at Lincoln Fields. So it's like you're detouring someone into yet another. You're moving them away from a construction zone that they can't even access the new infrastructure into another construction zone where there isn't a proper sidewalk because the route's all being zigzagged around as they rebuild the overpasses over where the train's going to go. It's a mess.
Yep. And then the original detour around the around the old bridge, because they thought it was going to be such a short detour, only about a week, they just had it gravel, and that was within the contract parameters. For a short-term detour, they're allowed to do gravel paths as just a temporary thing, but it's supposed to be small gravel, not big gravel. They did a big gravel detour path, which it's not horrible for a temporary amount of time. But then the weeks gone on and the months gone on, and it took them about 3 months to replace that with pavement, where people were just struggling to get through it on their bikes. The detour also necessitates that it goes around both bridges because they can't go under the old bridge anymore because it's no longer structurally sound because they tore it down and then they just left the start of it and they haven't removed it yet. So there's just a decaying bridge piece there, which is not the best. And then the detour for that bridge, it goes all the way up to Carling and then has to go on to this. It was originally just a sidewalk on Carling, but as the time went on and when they paved the path, they also added a proper separated cycling detour there to make it a little better.
Okay, well, that's good. At least
I'm just trying to refresh my mind. Is it construction concrete fences they put to separate, or mixing it with something else on Carling?
I believe they put Jersey barriers down, but
Yeah.
I'm not 100% on that.
Yeah. I have a feeling I saw it once and I was like, oh, that's better than what they said at first. But
first saw it, and I do recall remembering that it looked like a pretty good cycling detour, and that should be what they all are. But it took them a while to do it.
And to be clear, it's not like it's difficult. We're not asking them to build another street just for people to go through. We're just asking for, at large, we're just asking for a detour that's reasonable and actually offers you a safe option to get to your destination. Because I think it's funny how much, in general, at least when it comes to detour, for cars, we try to make it as little inconvenient. We, if there's a street right next to it, we'll just detour you on that street. If it's a one-way, we'll make it both ways and just remove parking for a few weeks. But if it's biking infrastructure, oftentimes the detour is just not having anything at all. An example that's coming to mind, and I think you're gonna go there exactly on right next to Carling Station on line 2, with the closure for reasons in big quotation marks, making all the corridor basically as you show on the map, to forces you, if you're I think they still call it the Trillium Pathway, but you have to go on Hickory, then down Baywater, Sherwood, Carling, instead of just detouring, let's say on Preston, or even just having a smaller path available next to where it is. Exactly. So it's a ridiculous.
Yeah. So the detour follows, like you said, down Hickory, and then I believe it goes all the way to Baywater and then Sherwood, crossing Carling. After about a week, they installed a cross right here, which was a big improvement. Personally, I've never seen it because the detour is so long. I take my own route. Because this would add about 30% to my trip just for this one detour. And then over here, it's just right on the sidewalk anyways. So I still follow down the Trillium Pathway, and then I just jump over a block on Carling on the sidewalk, and then I go back up Champagne. And this is, from my observations, what 99% of the users do, because the detour provided is not a real detour.
And it brings up the old question of, why not just have a detour through Champagne? Of course, there's no, when you get on the other side of Carling at Champagne, there's no path for now that continues down towards Prince of Wales or through the gardens. But if it was a car detour, that would be the detour they would have offered.
Exactly. And anyway, the pedestrian detour does go down here because they can't legally have... there seems to be different legalities for the NCC versus Ottawa, but the Ottawa does seem to be able to have bike detours on sidewalks officially. But in my perfect world, I would have had the detour be a bidirectional on Carling to Champagne, with one lane of Carling closed there. Which, when the construction started, it was closed anyways, and then the highway closure happened, and then the Carling closure never came back. Either by just the city not remembering to put it back, or intentionally choosing not to.
Sorry, go ahead.
They even disabled the bike lights at Carling to discourage the usage of it. Though that might be for utility reasons, because they are working on the path around here.
And I think it's worth pointing out that this path is really used. Myself, when I used to live a bit closer to downtown, I think that was one of my favorite bike rides to do in the city. First of all, because you get the trains obviously on one side, and then you get towards Prince of Wales, the bridge, and then you can just follow along the river itself. But I think it's a perfect example of well integrated in its community, so that people that live nearby have a reason to use it. It connects both sides of the guideway for the Trillium line, and also it's a mostly dedicated path that's shared between cyclists and pedestrian, yes, but it's large enough to actually allow you to pass someone, or if you need to. And there's multiple rest areas along the way. So I think that's by itself, the path there is a good example of something that should be considered to be built more often in the city.
Exactly.
Unless, Patrick, there's something you feel I'm completely missing there.
Well, no. It's the section of the path that is separated is fantastic, but it does for about half its length. It is just a regular mup as it goes down the street. They had the opportunity to fix that and make it separated with stage 2, but they didn't proceed that direction. They will be adding a cross ride at Gladstone that will separate pedestrians and cyclists at the intersection, but then it'll jump right back into a regular path. But one more thing about detours of the Trillium pathway. The current Trillium pathway detour is around the construction site, which is necessary because there's a lot of space needed for the work. But in my reading of the contract, I found that the detour requirements for this section required it to be connected to Balsam Street and Larch Street as a path connection that was either modified in future revisions of the contract that we never saw, or was just forgotten about, and nobody within the city uses the infrastructure and nobody brought it up because the connection was never made. So it's just for the last 2.5 years that the detour has been in place, it just hasn't existed, the connections to the streets that were contractually required.
And it's a common theme also. I would guess in general, it's like, not to say it's always an afterthought how we get to the final project, but to the final result, because, but especially on line 2, I think it's been even more apparent, is some of the detours, like you say, at Carling, doesn't make much sense. But if we go further down to South Keys, where they're basically it's not as bad now than it used to be, if I recall, but when they were starting work on building the station area itself, so they needed to widen the overpass for the tracks and everything, that part was blocked. So that removed a lot of connections for people that they would be able to do using the pedestrian the pedestrian bridge over the parkway. They would have to go all the way down to On Club and then connect onto it, and it was a pretty harsh connection, to put it mildly. But that was temporary. But during that time, their solution was to tell people, well, go through On Club. So there's a lot of approaches that seems to be just, well, they'll deal with it and be fine. But every time you think that way, it's kind of like if there's a bus detour and you expect someone to walk if they're used to walk maybe 5 minutes to get to their stop, and now you make it 20 minutes because you say, well, we have to, and your argument is it's just going to be for a few weeks. You're completely forgetting the point that for people, habits are it's a question of safety too, and the habits they're used to. So anyway.
Yeah, so you mentioned that about detour and length, but there's actually a detour that I think is just about to go into place over at Richmond for the tunnel construction. I believe they're going to be closing off the connection here very shortly, and the closest detour will be a massive distance around. I'm not sure if this one's even going to be accessible at the time to get around it. If you stop sharing my screen for a second, I can find the official email.
Yeah, they're gonna push people onto Byron from at the very least with Redwood to I'm blanking on the other name, but yeah.
Because see, there's a lot of, like we've been talking about there in the east and the west. There's a lot of good connectivity that's being added as part of stage 2. But in the south, for the Trillium line, there's not much being done. It's just being revamped. For the most part, the biggest change really is the new pedestrian crossing at Carleton University, which is going to be a big plus for the area, going between the campus and the Vincent Macy Park across the river. But beyond that, it's pretty scarce as far as what's being added.
Well, I mean, there's a good example we can cite for the south extension. It's the pathway that's going to be parallel to the guideway. At least they made a provision to actually have a path there. The problem is that pathway connects to nothing. It's not connecting to, other than at Walkley, where they're redoing some. Where they're redoing everything with the new station entrance and access there. They're redoing some parts of it. It's gonna help connect, but the problem, if you go further south, basically that path is just gonna be a trail that gets you from South Keys all the way to Bowlesville, and you just land there in the middle of nothing. Like that's
so. With that path, we don't actually know if it's going to be connected beyond Bowlesville to Linebank. Linebank,
yeah.
Linebank, okay. We don't actually know if it's going to be connected there. It seems like it might be, but I can't find official confirmation that it will be. And contacted Stage 2 has been hit or miss on that. If you share my screen again, I've brought up the provided detour for pedestrians as they do the work. And that is, I think, about an extra 400, 500 meters of walking to cross the street.
So basically from Redwood to Fraser, wow, that's harsh.
A big distance, yep. And then basically, if they cared about making a good connection, they would have provided a temporary sidewalk detour just to somewhere around here where it's out of the way, but is not an unreasonable distance to walk. And I think that will last several months as they build out the road there. But you can be assured that the road will maintain its connection.
Oh, the road they'll just send you to Byron temporarily and then move you back. They'll probably just cover it in temporary asphalt or something.
And this is just for accessing the bus stop. So if you take a bus, you have to suddenly walk an extra half kilometer.
And it goes without saying that for accessibility reasons, it's not just a question of like, oh, people are being difficult. No, there's real accessibility concerns. Yeah, because if they get you all the way to Fraser to cross, basically, it's important to also remember that I'm not exactly sure what's the setup at Fraser right now, but I don't believe it's a protected intersection. I think it's just I think it's just a regular intersection. So that means for people with lower mobility issues, it can be particularly dangerous and maybe a lot less inviting than just being able to cross at Redwood or something else like that.
Yeah.
So.
And at Cleary Avenue, there is actually a very large old age home, which closing this access and having such a long detour it's to the decision of whether to go out and go grocery shopping or not. And almost all of them will now no longer be able to do any of that for the duration of the construction.
And I think it's important to point out, because there's some people on Twitter who I'm not going to name, but that say it's unreasonable or that people that do groceries, nobody takes their bike and nobody takes transit to do it. Well, if you don't have a car, how else are you going to do it? So, yeah.
And having a car should not be the default option to get you somewhere. That's I think it's one of those things, like if I could get a big poster right behind me that says it, is having a car should not be the default option. But I feel like it's sorry, go ahead.
When I go to Montreal, for example, like most of the time I'll drive there. I mean, I'm not going to bike. I mean, let's just get that out of the way. It's not reasonable, and even if I had an electric bike,
but there's a good bike path to get you there. That's the thing.
Okay.
But yeah,
you go take pictures, and we'll take a look at that once you get back. But beyond that, once I get to Montreal, I have my own spots where I'll park, and then I take the metro for everything. I don't want to drive around there. The driving is a nightmare. And the metro gets me everywhere you want to go. It'll cross pretty much all the major points of interest. And beyond that, I can take Bixi.
Exactly. Yeah. Last mile.
And the city is made in such a way that you don't want to drive because it's a nightmare, but also because the alternatives are better. The metro can get me there quicker. Like I'll usually park at Namur, and I can take that downtown, or I can take that to the old Montreal, or to the east near Pinef, or wherever I want to go, and I'll get there quicker, or at least in the same amount of time, if not less, than it would be driving. And I'm not getting caught up in traffic. I'm not at risk of smashing into somebody. See, Alain Boyer, I guess Alain must have done it. Just Ottawa to Montreal by bike. That's a 2-day minimum trip. Have you done it, Alain? I'd be interested to know if you have.
But I'm gonna say it one more time. At least it's on separated infrastructure for most of the way. At least, because if I look at Google Maps is probably wrong about it for a lot of reasons. But I know you can get at the very least almost at Rigaud. Using the I don't recall the name, the former rail track that was converted into a bike track.
Oh, the Petit Train du Nord, or no?
No, that's for Mont Tremblant, but same kind of thing. Oh gosh, yeah, I'm really blanking out on the name, but that gets you at the very least towards Rigaud, and then from Rigaud to Vaudreuil. I'm not exactly sure what it looks like, but I think there is another one that continues there. But anyway, it's all that to say that at least there's infrastructure to do it. And in Quebec, there's La Route Verte, they call it. So basically, think of it as like a bike highway network. It's not built all on it's not all concrete. A lot of it is just compacted gravel and stuff like that. But you could technically, if you were really motivated, you could go from, and they have a great website with a great map if you want to if you're curious about that for your own sake. But La Route Verte, basically, you can get from, you could technically do Quebec to Montreal using that. You could do Quebec to Montreal to Val d'Or if you're really motivated about it, which is, I'm not sure I would ever be that motivated. That's probably a 4 or 5 day ride. But what I'm trying to say is there's at least they built those long distance links. They exist as an option, and by building those links, you indirectly improve the local connectivity too.
That's a big thing. So I think we should try and wrap up our discussion on the bikes and the infrastructure. We'll spend another 5 minutes, and then we'll turn to some other stuff. Réseau Express Métropolitain, perhaps. So, final thoughts on cycling and transit infrastructure? I think really both need to be available. Both need to be connected in such a way that it's possible, it's enticing, and there's an advantage to people from the get-go to be able to use it, rather than, when you take a transit or you take your bike to go between two places, if you have to really heavily rely on a map to try and see, well, I have to go this way, then I have to detour this way, then I have to go up this way. Don't miss that turn off, because then you're going to go too far and have to backtrack because there's no path connecting. Like, when it starts getting that disjointed, it turns people off, and you don't want to do it, or you're too fearful that you're going to take the wrong path and then not end up where you want to go. Because, for example, in a lot of parts in Ottawa, you're going through a lot of green space where it isn't totally obvious where you are. Now, exactly. I'm thinking of between, let's say, Sussex and Orleans. That path does, for the most part, follow the Sir George Etienne Cartier or whatever, their parkway, like the Aviation Parkway and the Rockcliffe Parkway. But you're not next to the road for the most part. Maybe 5% of it, you're near the road. The rest of it, you're right next to the river, like on rock, which is fine gravel. It's not hard to deal with at all by any means, but you don't know where you are. It's really secluded, and you don't know where you are. So if you want to get off of that and you want to go to one of those neighborhoods around there, you really have to look at the map and have some idea of where it is you need to turn up, because there's only so many turnoffs and you don't know which one you need to take. So obviously having proper connectivity that makes sense, perhaps connectivity that is in proximity to the roads, or in which you can see the local area as you pass through it, rather than being behind trees and bush where you can't see anything and you're just, winging it as far as your current position in your head, makes things a lot better and makes people want to use it, because they don't need to have further complication to be able to get from point A to point B when it's not even obvious. You drive and it's fairly obvious how to get from point A to point B. With the cycling, you have to backtrack, or might even say backpedal.
Oh yeah, totally.
So,
but that's the thing. There's a lot of dead ends, because I was looking the one you mentioned right there that gets you all the way from let's say you want to go from Rockcliffe to Orleans, or at least towards there. Like, sure, technically you can, but as you get towards the Georges-Etienne Parkway loop over the 417, there's a bike path that continues straight next to the river. So you, logically speaking, you would be inclined to believe, well, if I keep going straight, I'll go into the general direction. But you have to go off the path to join on the sidewalk on the side of Georges-Etienne, over the overpass, over the I don't feel like calling that a river. I guess it's a
creek.
Creek.
Yeah, thank you. The creek. Over
God,
the creek.
I hate that loop around there. That just
Yeah.
really, because look, if you put your mouse pointer up to the east point there, see how just right there. See, so instead of just going straight across, right, you have to do this whole loop all around. Like you see the highway, and then you loop back next to the parkway, and then it ducks back again between the trees, and you're next to the river. That's pretty much one of the only spots until you get to near a Rockcliffe downtown that you're anywhere near the road.
And it's one of those
it's
that
such
just
an unnecessary
splits.
detour. They could have put like a little bridge there, and that would have cut down. I mean, let's say for the average person, that's going to add like another 5-7 minutes, maybe. Like it's. I take that Okay, well, some people love it, but I mean, it's an example of you could streamline that. There's no reason that it has to necessarily loop all the way around.
Unnecessary complications. I think
It's an
that's
unnecessary
the word.
complication and extra distance. You don't have to go through that loop.
You can kind of go around like this way, but it's still a big detour.
Yeah, just because we're I mean, it would, in the defense of the detour, like, it's a scenic detour. I don't disagree with that, but if you look at it from a practical standpoint, I think it could be seen as confusing for someone coming from Rockcliffe, from downtown heading towards Orleans. And the whole point of backtracking and backpedaling is more that the infrastructure often leads to a dead end that goes nowhere. And even then, there's always a question of familiarity. There's always a question, like Ethan mentions, that the signage is pretty good. I haven't been there in a bit, to be honest. But I'll take your word on that. If the signage is good, that's really, and even as the extra distance printed. Well, see, that's fine. I think that's. I probably chose the example I want. I probably chose an example there more than anything, but. I think a big part of the problem is that we often have infrastructure that's nowhere, and then we expect the user to figure out how to get to the next part of it, or how to figure out to get somewhere from there. So, because cars, you can use Google Maps, Apple Maps, so you have plenty of options. All the road closures are nowadays pretty much in those platforms. So it's really easy to route something around the detour. For a bike, many of Google Maps does bike navigation, but it doesn't have much detour management or closure management, unless that people, if they still let people do that, feed the data that there's a detour somewhere. But even then, it's up to the user to know about it, report it, and figure out how they get around there if there's no signage or if there's no dedicated link from there. So, but yeah, I think it just shows a poor example, and that's on me, really.
And you bring up a good point about how you don't, like, again, when you're driving, you have multiple ways and multiple routes that you can take, right? Let's say you're going from Orleans to downtown, you could go by the Queensway. You could take Montreal. You could take Innis. You could take Jeanne d'Arc, or not Jeanne d'Arc, St. Joseph to Montreal Road, to Rideau Street, to Wellington, let's say. Loop through that way. I mean, there's at least three, and then if you were to take other city streets, I mean, those would be the three most direct corridors. Oh, the Parkway, you could take that as well. So those are the four most direct ways to get there. And there's a multitude of other ways if you're crossing through all sorts of streets and zigzagging around, right? If you're taking your bike and you want to take biking infrastructure, there's really only one solid way of doing it. I mean, there's other ways, but I mean, they're not going to be as direct. They could be longer. You might have to check the map quite a bit more. And
often it's a compromise between fast and safe.
Yeah.
Because you might have a faster, more direct option that's just a painted lane on the side of let's say on Montreal Road, Montreal and then Saint Joseph, or it could be in some cases, well, sure, you can do it on a dedicated path, but you're gonna have to go all the way around. So it's a convenience question, and as you mentioned, options that are missing in many places.
And that parkway can also be secluded, because there was someone that was I mean, I hate to bring it up here, but there was someone years ago that was killed on that because it was secluded, and depending on the time of day, there's few people that might be passing through there, so there's opportunity if somebody's alone for something to happen. And sadly enough, something did happen to someone, and because it's off the beaten path, and it was probably the way that person felt was the only logical way of getting through. Well, we need to do better. And I think that with stage 2, the connectivity that's going to be from Montreal to Blair, and then continuing beyond from there, things are improving. There's still some ways to go. And it's definitely lots of improvements that are coming because of this. And hopefully with these steps being taken, that, those missing links, those segments that aren't part of this phase of construction do get implemented at some point in the future. For example, like a proper full connection, direct connection between Montreal to Jeanne d'Arc, rather than having to loop through or go this way or go that way to make it around there. Like, you would think logically they would have something that would connect straight through there, but
I believe at some point in time they're going to be planning an improvement on St. Joseph.
I would hope so.
I really hope so. Yeah, it's definitely starting to get a lot better. It's being considered in the project plans, and for stage 3, I think we see an even bigger improvement. Like just for the recent corridor change around Woodruff, we changed out from the removing the buildings along here to being in the median of the road, and we saw designs, stage 3 designs, which is our first kind of look at the project, of protected intersections all along Woodruff, which is a street that I wouldn't even consider cycling right now, but after these are done, it's definitely something much more reasonable.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think it's also worth mentioning, like, we're talking about Ottawa right now because I think it's the ones we're more familiar with, especially Patrick, but it's a problem in many, many, many cities that are building transit infrastructure and not thinking about the last mile connection kind of thing. So Toronto maybe is a good example of that. I'm not pointing fingers, but Toronto. Anyway, it's a whole other conversation. I'm not really qualified to talk about it or familiar enough, but like it's not just Ottawa problem, to be clear.
So with that, we'll leave our discussion with this final chat quote. In North America, we see cycling infrastructure strictly as recreational rather than, a way that people use to get around. Not everybody has a car.
Exactly.
Not everybody wants to or needs to take public transit. And not everybody can walk from point A to point B either, which is because it's an unreasonable distance or amount of time involved. I mean, cycling can speed you up quite a bit and make farther distances possible without having to rely on another method of getting around.
I mean, it's well known you cannot do groceries on a bike. Like it's a stated fact that's been known for ages. Come on, like the only way to go do your groceries is by car. Like, can you imagine having some sort of I don't know. I'm just saying crazy idea.
bag.
A rack or a cargo bag or even a backpack. Like it's all crazy ideas, like what when you could have a car that you sit alone in it that requires more infrastructure, more cost maintenance, and that just to have the luxury of having a trunk that you could put your bag in.
Or a frunk.
Yeah, but that's a whole other conversation. Like I'm it wouldn't be a real chat if I start talking about EVs and stuff like that. But to put it mildly, saying saying an EV is the solution to all problems in the world is not. As much as I love mine, it's not. So there's Alan Fisher. I feel like I'm gonna blank out on his name. The YouTuber Alan Fisher has a pretty good video about the many problems about EVs and themselves, but their EVs are as much problem as gas cars. It's just that you remove, in big quotation marks, some of the environment questions about pollution and stuff like that. But the land usage is still terrible. The dependency on it is still terrible. It doesn't solve anything. It just fixes the inconvenient problem of climate change. Fixes in big quotation marks there. Yeah. Anyway,
so we're gonna wrap this up here. So I'm looking behind us on the screen, and it seems like what's this here? It looks like some trains. Okay, so you can't really see it super well.
It's not the effect you expected, I think.
I was hoping for a little more.
There we go. Well,
is there a way to see it better?
People can figure out what's
there we go. Look. Oh, what's that?
It's a ram.
It's a ram.
Well,
so everybody, we all know that the REM is going to be opening hopefully in the next couple months. They're targeting, or at least back in August during the visit, they were saying they were targeting hopefully December 1st as a soft target. Lots of activity. Alain Boyer, who's been chatting with us in the live stream chat here, has been very gracious to get out and take lots of pictures. So if you go on our REM site, rem.railfans.ca, under the snapshot updates, you can see plenty of stations, especially in the De Montagne branch and beyond. Yep. But the progress really all over is quite staggering and stunning. The first section there between Brassard and Gare Centrale is hopefully going to open in the next. Actually, if they pull off sometime around December 1st, it's like a month and a half from. I mean, it's very exciting, right? So, and now we're actually catching on the Pont Saint-Mille de Champlain live stream on YouTube. They have 6 different cameras, I believe. Really, cameras 1 to 4, maybe 5. You get views of the guideway that's in the middle of the bridge, as well as the flyover on both sides. I haven't seen it myself, but I know David saw it, and I think Mash saw it as well.
Mash-Dash,
yeah. Seeing the actual train going over the bridge at low speeds there. Oh, it looks so good. Look, I got my Madame Rems up here saying, "Let's go, guys, let's go." But it's going to be great. I mean, that's going to be very exciting, and that's really going to transform the city. And I think it's going to be important because of what we're seeing in Montreal right now. The Louis Hippolyte Lafontaine tunnel is really being
gutted down at this point.
Gutted to the point that I think it's 3 lanes in both directions, 3 lanes and 3 lanes, and pretty much 2 lanes on one side are being closed and 1 lane on the other. So there's going to be 2 lanes going, I think, to the South Shore and 1 lane to Montreal, or maybe the opposite. But I mean, it's really
half of the lanes. Yeah, so
it's half of the lanes.
And one southbound to northbound.
Yeah. So the REM can definitely help with that. Yeah. See, 3 years of construction. And I know that for those, if there's people watching this from Montreal, the STM announced that they're going to be adding an extra train to the yellow line. So that should help give a bit more capacity over there. But I mean, that's a big deal. the
And
tunnel
it's
there.
worth pointing that with the I mean, as much as I love the ramp, there's one thing I still have issues with, and it's the new zone-based tariffs for the for public transit around Montreal, around the Greater Montreal area. That if you're on the South Shore, you have one metro station. Now it's $5 if you want to go to like there. I don't think they've been really considerate of the options. I like for outside of the island, because it brings like they dropped it, I think, by 40 cents or something like that from the original price. But it's hostile, to put it mildly, especially in a situation where that at this point from the South Shore it's going to remove one more link again. That's um, really needed on that part of it, because for those that are not familiar around Montreal and everything, like if you're on the 20 on Highway 20 and you want to go to Montreal, downtown Montreal, normally it's the tunnel is the most direct way. But if the tunnel is closed after that, your next option is Jacques Cartier, Champlain, and oh god, Victoria? No.
I think so.
Yeah, the other bridge that has the CN tracks in the middle. I'm really blanking on the name, but anyway, so you have three options, and all three of them are already jam packed anyway at rush hour. So it's not it's going to be really chaotic, and I would really hope that at the very least the ARTM does end up considering to at the very least reduce the fare, so maybe put it in line with the Zone 8 prices. So well, Victoria, there you go. Thanks, Ellen. At the very least, try to match what they would offer in Zone A, so on the island itself, to be a bit more, the word I'm going with, considerate, but I would say reasonable would probably be the better word, because it's already the next 3 years will be rough. If you're on the South Shore of Montreal, like if you're towards Samuel de Champlain and so in Brossard and La Prairie, well, and Distrant, whatever, like the ram's going to be there. It's going to help things quite a bit. But if you're towards Longueuil, good luck.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the
like. I think that the redo of the fare table is, especially if you're only going to be using it on the island of Montreal, it's not necessarily a bad thing, because if you have EXO, you have the STM, you have now the REM. And then there's still some other little operators here and there, but I mean that's really the main crux of it. Going around one ticket or one pass, and you'll be able to use the whole thing. It's not like you have to figure out for this one, or you have to have this fare, or you have to have that fare loaded on your Opus card. I mean, one fare, you're good to go. But yeah, when you go to Longueuil there, I mean, it's a little rough. Like when you get off the metro, and especially at Longueuil station, because for people that know, the fare gates are only on the departing side, right? Okay, so look, I'm gonna backpedal here and say that you're supposed to get off the metro train when it gets to the terminus, right? You're not supposed to stay on it when it goes into the tail tracks to then reverse and switch over, right? So you have to get off the train. When you get off the train at Longueuil, there's no fare gates shared between both platforms. There's no fare gates on the arrival side. You pretty much come up into Place Charles Lemoyne on top, and then if you want to go back towards Montreal, you go back down. The fare gate's right in front of the train. So you're pretty much, as soon as you get there, you're pretty much screwed to pay again. You can't get a day pass with Zone A and B, which I'm kind of shocked that that's the case. You can only get a day pass if it's a Zone A.
Yeah.
So automatically, for example, let's say when the REM opens, if we want to go and take pictures, right? There's 3 stations on the South Shore. So Ducartier, Panama, and Brossard. If we want to get off at those stations and look outside and then get back on, it's going to be like $5 each time we do that?
It's
I mean, that's sort of like an extreme example there, but I mean, in a very short period of time, you can easily spend $15 just to go check it all out. I'm sure at the opening they'll probably have some special rule going on there for the first day or two, so people can check things out. But for people around there, hopefully something gives and changes on that. At least a day pass or something. Because for people that if you're not a frequent transit user and you want to get on, let's say near Brassard, and you want to get off at Panama, you're going maybe 1 or 2 stops, but you're going to be paying. You're gonna pay both times you want to get on, even if you're within the transfer window.
Yeah,
Kind of rough.
and it's the same problem in Laval because if you're De la Concorde, I think his name
Yeah,
is.
De la Concorde, Cartier,
Yeah.
and Montmorency.
Yeah, so if you're at De la Concorde and just want to go inside, you still need to pay $5. Well, before the adjustment, $5.25. But in reality, what it means is if you're 2 people, and Alain makes the point exactly in the chat about that, it's probably cheaper to take your car and park downtown, because if you do a round trip, that's $20 right there for 2 people. If you're 4, that's 4. Like if you're going with your kids, if you're going with friends, it adds up really quickly. So. I don't want to say it's swing and a miss, because at the same time I do understand the rationale of making user pay on the distance they travel. Ottawa has the other opposite effect, that if you live in the back end of Orleans or Canada, you're paying the same fare as someone that does one stop downtown. But the other extreme is that if you live on the South Shore or the North Shore and you're just already on the metro network, a trip that would cost you $3.50 or $3.75 is now costing you $5 each way. And in many cases, as you said, your only option is either you pay for a 1, 2, 10, or a monthly pass. You don't have a day pass. You don't have a weekend pass. It's all or nothing. So it's food for thought, I would say, is the word there.
But hopefully they can they work on that there.
Yeah.
Especially with the tunnel closure and all that. I mean, it would be better. So Nouvelle Écosse says, I didn't even know the metro had zone pricing. So that came into effect, I think it was July 1st?
Start of August or July.
Oh, was it
yes.
August? Well, I think
one
it was
of the
July
two. Pick one of the months.
Yeah. But yeah, that's how it works now. So if you're on the island of Montreal, it's Zone A. Zone B is Longueuil and the South Shore
Laval,
area
yeah.
around there, and Laval. And then Zone C is beyond. So let's say you're taking the EXO train to Saint Jerome, or to Vaudreuil or Hudson or anything like that. That would be Zone C.
Essentially, it's pretty much everything that's on the north and south shore of Laval and Montreal. So like other than Longueuil. So think of it as, if you think of the greater Montreal area, it's basically everything that's not Laval, Longueuil, or Montreal. And then you have Mont-Saint-Hilaire and Rigaud. Well, yeah. And Rigaud, that would be included in the zone D, the D zone itself, which is even worse. And you cannot buy a ticket other than for Zone A. If you do a trip between, say, I don't know, Atwater and Gare Centrale, you pay one fare. But if you want to do a trip only in Laval, you cannot buy a B zone ticket itself, if I recall. You have to buy an AB. So that means your trip in Laval is now more expensive because you're not in downtown Montreal, which is a bit.
But I mean, it was always like that, though. That's the thing. So like
Yeah,
back in the day, they had like Tram 1 and Tram 2 and these different kind of fare passes, and it was always more expensive than just the STM pass on its own. But still,
yeah, but even if you want to take
further
just
exaggerating
a bus route, yeah. But if you just want to take a bus route in Laval, so like you know the well, okay, I'm sorry. I should clarify what I just said there. Bus routes, you can get a B, C, or D ticket. But for other modes, so like if the moment you're on the metro, you need A, B, or if you're starting from the South Shore, North Shore, A or B or C or D, if you plan to go on the metro. But if you're just taking the bus itself, you have tarifications for each zone individually. But the moment you need to go into another zone, now you need to make sure you have the proper one on your card and everything. So yeah.
But anyways, enough about the fare stuff there. I don't know how that we're ready for rail, but we went off track there. So but anyways, long story short, we're very excited about the REM.
Yes.
Expect a lot of coverage on that once that opens. There's definitely probably going to be some lead up media events coming in the relatively near future. So probably sometime in November, because they're going to be really getting down and dirty with the testing phase to make sure everything is ironed out. And of course, it's important to remember that the REM will only open once they are confident that it's going to work properly, because they only get one chance at making a good opinion on this. They want to do it right, and we've seen in other cities how things can, if it doesn't go smoothly, how public perception and buy-in of it really doesn't work out well.
And if you haven't done so yet, there's a lot of coverage that was done August or July.
August.
When we went, yeah. So Shane and I had the opportunity to go see the Montreal tunnel between McGill and Gare Centrale. We had a look behind the scenes at both McGill, Gare Centrale, and the maintenance depot, which is where that picture in the one of the maintenance depot, which is one of the picture. It is the picture we have in the back. We also had the chance to chat with Arut from which is the VP Finance of CDP.
The VP of the project, yeah.
Yeah. So and all that to say that, like, if you want things to hype you up for the REM opening, it's a really good place to start, because I think in that coverage there's things that the regular user is not going to see. The regular user is never going to have a chance to go in the tunnel like we had on that opportunity. And I think for history's sake and everything like that, it's worth documenting and having a look. And once you're actually riding the train there, be able to think of all that was necessary to get there in the first place.
And I think it was interesting when we visited just going, like when we went down to McGill. I mean, we're going to wrap up the live stream there very briefly, but when we first got there, we went in by the Place Montréal Trust, went down to the food court, took the stairs down into the parking garage, and then at the corner of the parking garage, there was like a fenced off area, cut through the foundation, and there was some steps from there to go underneath the building, and we could actually see like the concrete holding up the building. Like it was really something. It's like, you got like these 40 some story buildings, and you're walking underneath the foundation of this building that's been there for what, 20, 30 some years. Like, it's just weird, like how, like that they're excavating underneath a building that has like an immeasurable amount of weight coming down into the ground, and just to see all this and how they didn't disturb anything, and like they kept pointing out the Banana Republic up there, and I had to look it up, but it's just so fantastic. I'm just so excited to see all of this open. The Gare Centrale is going to look better than ever. New connectivity options through there. The artwork at the stations, it's not going to be totally done when it first opens, but Panama and Du Quartier are going to have some really stunning murals on the walls in the station. It's very eye-catching, bright, colorful mosaics. So just lots to look forward to. Fingers crossed, as Alain says. I'm sure Alain is going to keep sharing pictures with us and making the excitement even more real, and just lots to see, lots to look forward to. Very much looking forward to it. I'm getting tongue twisted there because I'm very excited.
And probably going to be the only opening we're going to get in 2022 now that Crosstown's delayed, and the Valley Line is date pending at this point would be the better word. Trillium is delayed, and we don't know until when. So there's
we went back to the O train there.
Yeah.
So Pat, we'll fly it over to you for now, because you like taking pictures and following stage 2, especially the south. We've talked a lot on the Discord there that the south extension's been very slow moving visually. It's like we're just kind of let's go, we're putting up a door this week and next week. Like, it feels really slow, right?
Yes.
Oh, it has been.
Tomorrow we got the doorknob. We'll install that at the end of the week. Oh, you get the hinges that those are like, it's not that bad, but it's really slow looking.
It feels
right?
like
because the thing with the south is that, especially the downtown segment there, so between Bayview and Greenboro, all that already existed before, right? They're just modernizing those stations slightly, but lengthening the platform. So instead of 40 meters or 80 meters. So because of that, you kind of feel like, okay, well, why is this taking so long? They ripped out the tracks, put in new tracks, put more concrete, make the platform bigger. But I mean, they kind of really ripped everything out and restarted, right?
Yeah, they
But
were basically building the stations from scratch, even
Yeah.
the ones that already existed.
Mm.
Something that we've started to notice in the last couple of years, and going into this next winter construction, which wasn't supposed to be a winter of construction, is approaching winter, they really speed up the work and start
Yeah.
actually making progress. And it's kind of strange. Like, if they just kept on the same speed the whole time, it would have been done by now. Because in the last week, they put down a lot of rails and a lot of ties, and
Yeah.
the stations are looking so much better than they looked just a month ago. But we
Yeah.
have the entire 7 months, 8 months since the last winter, where there's been such slow progress the whole time.
But I mean, that's the point I was making there, that like finally we're seeing like some big mobilization. Like I went by Bayview this week and I saw about 20 some, probably there's probably more, but I mean, from what I could see, just like standing around there for a couple minutes, at least 20, 25 people working actively. There's people painting stuff, sealing this, working on concrete here, putting down ties, welding, cutting, I don't even know what some of the other people were doing, but they were using some heavy machinery. I don't know what it was, but like they were scraping some concrete with something. I'm not quite sure what it was, but lots of,
they were leveling it out, like just making the even surface. If that's
It's really nice to see.
Mm.
Like every day that I go by on my commute now, I can take a picture and it will be different than the day before.
Mm.
And for months, that barely changed every time.
Yeah,
so
I think there's nothing more. There's a really great way to visualize all that, and Shane knows what I'm going with. There's the snapshot pages on the Rail Fans website. Patrick has contributed quite a bit, and with his drone that makes some really great pictures to get a sense of how a site progresses over time. And some examples of that is, for example, you have Corso Italia that looks. If you look at pictures from start of the year and now, it looks pretty similar in many spots. If you go at Carling, kind of the same thing. If you go, I think the station that made the most progress this year is probably Carlton, I would say, because of they had to dig under and build a new passage and everything. But even then, a lot of it just happened. Yeah, a lot of it just happened in the last 2-3 weeks. Like it at some point, I recall we were joking a bit about that on Discord, but at some point you had one employee at maybe during a weekday each site on the south extension, but then you had 20-30 people working on the east extension or on the west extension, and then you have the tunnel making a lot of progress. You have Lincolnfield that's almost looking like a complete station, and then you have things like Bayview that for all summer looked like just a pile of steel and nothing else.
So I guess that's the important point. Like the spring and the summer there were really slow. It didn't seem like much was happening, but I mean, obviously something was happening, because now it's just like the pace is like really, really picking up there. And I mean, I think we wouldn't be surprised if we see rail probably in the next 2 or 3 weeks going from end to end or fairly close to it.
At least at the release of a via flyover. That would be. I think that's going to be the last. I would expect at least it's the last part they're going to connect together. But
it's not quite there, but it's getting close.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's getting close to actually looking like a track that you can run a train throughout. But the stations themselves, they're still. I think for some of them, there's still a lot of work left, especially the ones that are getting new steel structures and some like. I mean, I don't think anyone expects Moody's Bay to be late in terms of construction, because it's just a concrete platform. Kind of the same thing with Greenboro, sorry. But if you look at South Keys, if you look further down the line to Leitrim and Boyceville, like those ones, there's still a lot of work to be done. But it picked up.
Hopefully the best scenario would be that if it's not already next year, they're saying I don't know. I don't know what they're saying at this point. Like we haven't had an update, right? We should have had an update back in September, and then there was supposed to be October, and now they're saying November. So hopefully it doesn't get pushed back further. But we should have a better idea of what the timeline looks like right now. But last we were told months ago was that it was about 9 months behind. So that was placing it. It should have opened this year.
Mid 23.
Yeah. So mid 2023. Hopefully not much farther than that. But the best case would be if it doesn't fully reopen all the way to Limebank. And I don't think it necessarily, it's not like a lot of people are going to be totally disadvantaged if it doesn't get to there, but at least to Greenboro or South Keys. So that core section in Carleton, because I think Carleton students there, they're at a big disadvantage at this point that they have to take a bus in and go down Bronson and all that stuff. It's pretty piss poor.
There's students that are gonna There's students are gonna complete the degrees, and I've never had the chance to take Trillium on their UPass because
it was supposed to have been shut down for 2 years at most.
Yeah. Now we're doing on 3, maybe 3.5. Who knows? Like it's anyway. I find it disheartening to see that we're not getting updates. First of all. At least official updates that are sent to the public, because we can track the progress with cameras as much as we want. We don't know what's the backlog they have on their site. We don't know what's their expected timeline on any of that. And in the meantime, I think it's a double-edged sword, because in Ottawa we have 3 projects. Well, realistically 2 projects at the same time. We have East-West and we have South. They're done by 2 different contractors with 2 different crews, budgets, and timelines. And I think for most of us, it looks like East is an advance. We don't have official confirmation of that because that's how things are in the city. But as someone that passes by them almost daily, it does look like they're much closer to have trains running there than on some parts of the south. On the south extension, and the same goes in the west. They have to build 3 different tunnels in reality. Like they have to build the one that leads between Queensview and then Lincoln Field, which is a short tunnel, but they still have to finish it. They have the one along
Lincoln Fields to
clearly, exactly. And then they have the one on the S Jam, which is progressing, but I know, like we know, they have schedule pressures on the west extension. And meantime, you have the east that just seems to be rolling around and progressing, but it's been progressing continuously. It's not been like, 2 months during the year we get work, and then the rest of the year there's nothing.
No, the amount of work on the east there is really, really something else. I mean, I don't think it's going to open before the south.
No,
but I mean, you never know, because things can happen. But the biggest challenges, milestones, and hurdles, I think they've already long passed those on the east. I mean, they've already moved the highway around enough. They already have the guideway in place. The track will they're saying the track should be done before the end of the year for men to end on there.
And I believe them. Honestly,
definitely. I think we've also found there's a lot of disadvantages to having the corridor in the center of the highway, but a big advantage that we've definitely seen is just how efficient it is to build. Yes, they're going to be built probably ahead of schedule.
Yeah.
I mean,
and I'm looking forward to that segment opening too, very, very much.
Yeah. And I hope that, to circle back to what we were talking in the start about stage 2 of biking infrastructure, is that I do hope they're going to open it all at the same time, and at least have it ready at the same time, because there's especially in the east, because we're building in the median of a highway, it's really important to give people a proper option to connect to within the communities themselves on both sides of the 174. Yeah. It's not just a question of like, well, my neighborhood is right next to the stop, so like it's whatever, it's not the end of the world. Like no one's right next to the stop. Everyone needs to get to the stops.
In the original connectivity proposals, they did plan a lot of cycling connections for the different bridges, but we don't really know how that kind of finished out in the contract. We have ideas from reading the contract, but this November is when they're going to present what it actually will be. And that's kind of pulling it tight for, can they get the work done before it actually opens? Because
it gives them 1 year.
Possible it opens within a year of that presentation. So will it happen? We'll find out.
So definitely lots to watch there. Again, be sure to check on the O-Train site, our O-Train site. So otrain.railfans.ca/snapshot. You'll be able to see all sorts of photos, including those great photos by Patrick.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Patrick. You're quite the pilot.
Every day I see those pictures, I'm like, gosh, I want a drone. And then I remember, and then I have it in my, I always have it in my Best Buy, like in my cart, and I'm like, I'm gonna buy it. I'm gonna buy it. It's been a year, and I'm like, yeah, it's. But every time I see them,
I thought it was close earlier this year, and then the dishwasher was like, I don't think so.
yeah,
It's like
to buy
clean
tires for
dishes
the car. So
well, for me, it was clean dishes or a drone. I'm gonna go for the dishes.
anyway,
Yeah. And of course, for the REM, be sure to check out our REM site as well. So rem.railfans.ca, and you'll be able to see the beautiful pictures of the construction progress that's happening down there, which again is quite substantial and significant. So definitely a lot going on all over. And as Alain points out in the chat there, I think we'll end it with that. For the REM, they will be doing a virtual meeting on October 24th to talk about the work on Ile Bigra, Sainte-Dorothée, and the overpass at Lac des Deux Montagnes. So, and the pictures that Alain has shared for the overpass there, or the bridge going over some of Lac des Montagnes there. I mean, stunning.
yes.
Like, it's not super high off the water, but like it looks like something that's just going to be like, wow. You know, the amount of elevated sections on the REM is going to provide, and the possibility to look out both the front and the back window unimpeded. I mean, just to ride the thing is going to be like a sheer joy. I mean, I'm so beside myself. It's going to be amazing.
What I'm wondering is if for Shane, I think it's quite we all know how much Shane loves the Montreal Metro, and it's quite obvious also with his background and everything like that. Are you gonna like the REM more than the Montreal Metro at the end of the year? That for me, that's a big question mark, because as much the Metro has its character and everything, I love the thing, but I mean the REM.
Well, hold on there. Hold on.
Oh boy. So yeah, the stream was supposed to finish like 45 minutes ago. If you're holding to the schedule, we're pulling a Transit Next move there.
Well, I got this Metro book here.
Oh well,
I bought it at now gone, but will never be forgotten. Le Parchemin at Station Bellerive.
Yeah,
really like that place. But I mean, just it talks about the Metro, and they got all these great photos inside here of the stations. Plamondon Station du Collège. It's a beautiful book. I mean, even if you just look at the pictures, especially of Préfontaine.
Yeah.
But yeah, well, I like the. I hope the REM people aren't watching, but no, I'm gonna love the Metro more. There's just something about the Metro that will never die with me.
BoutiqueSTM.com.
What?
But I mean, there's Boutique STM, and I wish we get Boutique Rem. I'm just pitching ideas there, merchandising as it's a really good way to recover your investment. Wink, wink.
Yeah. At least from people like us and other rail fans. But all I'm going to say in regulation to the Metro, again, we did a lot of work over the past summer there. All the stations are now photographed. All the text is done. There's going to be more content, obviously, that's going to come. So it's going to try and approach the level of what we've done with the O-Train and what we started doing with the REM. But be sure to check out metro.railfans.ca. There's lots of great pictures of the stations taken by myself, by David, and Mathieu Fortin, who created a lot of the text for the site as well. So thank you very much. But very glad that site that was a long work in progress. But it's pretty much mostly done now. So definitely feel free to check it out. and you know, I hope you enjoy that. 'Cause
Yeah.
there was a lot of time and love put into that, because the metro is really something else.
Yeah.
And as Nouvelle Écosse says, the metro stations are worlds unto themselves. And it's true, because
Yes.
they were all done by different architects, different designers, and the style, the look. Obviously, there's some consistent design language from one station to the other because it's all the metro, but you know, just how vast and amazing they all are, and different. I mean, especially De La Savane. I mean, that one feels like you're like in an alien world or something. I mean, it's really something else, with like those orb lights and like the and of
Yeah.
course 5 more coming, as Alain says, with the blue line extension going
Yeah.
towards Anjou. That's going to be something else. So hopefully, they have started working on some preliminary work on that. Hopefully that doesn't fall behind and that there isn't any hurdles to allow that to finally complete itself, because it's been a long time coming.
Yeah.
And
But
who knows, we might even see 9-car trains on the blue line.
yeah.
That still remains to be seen what they plan to do for that line, if they're going to use the MR73 or if they're going to use the Azur. But we
I don't
might
think we're
finally
gonna.
see. You don't think Azur?
I would love to see Azure,
But I
but
think they
I
would use the
don't.
MR73.
Yeah, but I don't think we're gonna see 9 train cars in a while there.
Mhm.
Like, I mean, if the STM is actually facing monetary pressures as they say they are, and that ridership is not picking up to the extent they are thinking it is, I think they're gonna try to delay it as much as they can. I would love to see 9-car trains. I would love to see maybe. I mean, I know the MR73 is a classic at this point. It's vintage, to put it mildly, but I would love to see more Azure. But I don't even know if there's like potential for another order of Azure rolling stock at this point because of the old Alstom acquisition of Bombardier. I know it's a joint project, but like, and technically they have all the blueprints for it if they want to build more. But
And La Pocket is pretty much shutting down. So
it's surviving. I think that's the word
yeah.
we're going to use for that. Yeah.
Well, let's hope for the best for all those people involved out there, and for their future and their well-being. And we'll see what happens. Hopefully, there's more orders and keeps those good working people there employed and building quality rolling stock. Which, you know, the Azure is definitely the highlight, and the, you know, something else. So I think we'll leave it at that. We've been talking for long enough. I think everybody wants to go for lunch. Thank you all for joining us at our new earlier time. Let us know what you think. Hopefully leave some comments if you think it was a good time, if you like the evening a little better. Feel free to share. Thanks again, David, for joining us. Patrick.
Made for a great chat. Slightly delayed in the slightly longer than expected chat, but a really great chat.
Okay, well, thanks again.
On that awkward silence.
In that awkward silence, we will wish everyone a good weekend, and we'll see you hopefully on the REM in the coming
sooner
months.
than later.
Okay. And here we go. This is Shane, David, and Patrick signing off. And we'll see you on the train.